Today's video is one that's going to be different from any video I've ever made on this channel. And that's because today we're going to be reading a true story that was sent in by a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous. This story isn't about curses or monsters or any of the stuff we normally read about. It's about something that actually happened to someone, and honestly, I think that's even scarier. Let's go ahead and get right into it. I know there are a lot of spooky, scary stories that come across here, but I'll start by saying this isn't paranormal or has anything to do with ghosts or the unexplainable. This is my real personal experience, and I want to share it simply to bring awareness to how dangerous hallucinogens and drugs can be. To me, that's scarier than ghosts. This will be a super long one, so bear with me, and please keep this anonymous. Keep doing what you're doing great. Feel free to comment afterward if you'd like. I genuinely want people to know how badly these things can affect your life. So if this helps even one person, that's all I care about. I was never really into drugs. I was a huge stoner for many years and used it medicinally. I'd actually say it helped me through some really difficult periods of my life when I was struggling with my mental health. Aside from that, I'd drink occasionally with friends. But as people around me started experimenting with other substances, I was never very interested. The one exception was psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, things like that. I had heard plenty of positive experiences from people I trusted and thought it might be something I'd try once in my life. The first time I tried mushrooms was at a friend's house with a group of people. I won't get into too much detail, but that friend is no longer in my life. It was actually a really good experience. I was surrounded by people I trusted. I didn't take too much, and while it definitely felt strange, I enjoyed it. I think I tried them one other time after that, although honestly my memory is pretty foggy after everything that happened later. Eventually, I wanted to try LSD since I felt like I had handled mushrooms well. My best friend and I planned a night with that same friend after his parents went out of town. Long story short, we ended up taking something that wasn't what we were told it was. The night became traumatic for reasons I'd rather not get into, and it completely changed how I viewed those kinds of experiences. The whole situation put me off trying anything again for quite a while, which I think was understandable. I was almost convinced never to touch psychedelics again, but eventually I decided it had been more about the people and the environment than the substances themselves. By the way, this doesn't have much to do with the main story. I just wanted to give some background. I eventually tried LSD again years later with my best friend in a safe environment, and it ended up being one of the best experiences I'd ever had. At least I got to replace one terrible memory with a better one. This was before COVID. I was still in high school. I'm 24 female now, so quite a bit of time passed before I decided to try anything again. During COVID, I lived with my best friend for a while. We drove up to Oregon to visit her sister since none of us had much else going on at the time. Everyone involved had been isolating and taking precautions. While we were there, we tried psychedelics again, and everything went well. It gave me confidence that I could handle those experiences responsibly in the right environment. Fast forward to 2022. I moved into my own apartment with a roommate who was my friend at the time. Having my own place gave me a lot more freedom, but like I said before, I still wasn't someone who regularly experimented with drugs. I did try another substance once out of curiosity and ended up having a panic attack for nearly 3 hours, so I quickly realized it wasn't for me. The only thing was that my roommate had a reliable source for mushrooms, so every once in a while, my boyfriend and I would get some and have a relaxing night together. We never overdid it. We'd stay home, play Call of Duty, which becomes important later, spend time together, and just enjoy ourselves somewhere familiar. Sometimes we'd trip a little harder than others, but it wasn't something we did often, and we always waited until we had the time and the right setting. I mention all of this because I wasn't inexperienced. I knew roughly what dosage worked for me. I understood what to expect mentally, and we'd never had any problems before. One of our favorite things to do was spectate random players in Warzone. We'd intentionally lose early just so we could watch other people play. Some of the funniest memories I have came from those nights, and I still have plenty of clips saved. Anyone who's ever experienced mushrooms probably knows that sometimes incredibly strange coincidences seem to happen. I don't necessarily mean visual hallucinations, I mean bizarre moments that feel almost impossible to explain. Things happen that never seem to happen again. That's relevant. I'll get there. My timeline is honestly all over the place, so if I'm a little vague, bear with me. I believe this was still 2022. I was in school studying art and taking classes toward an associate's degree. I didn't really need the degree for what I wanted to do, but I figured it would be nice to finish it. I was a full-time student, so I wasn't working then, but there happened to be a break in my schedule that gave me some free time. It was sometime in April, and my boyfriend and I decided to use the mushrooms we had left over from a previous night. At this point, I still smoked marijuana pretty regularly and had built up a high tolerance. It wasn't unusual for me to smoke while tripping, in fact. It usually made everything feel more relaxing. What happened that night became the beginning of the darkest period of my life. At the time, I didn't have a desk set up, so we played Call of Duty on my big TV. My boyfriend, we'll call him G, was sitting with me on our fold-out couch. We usually left it pulled out like a bed because it was just more comfortable. My roommate was home, but she stayed in her room and gave us our space. Earlier that night, we were spectating a Warzone match. If you've ever done that, you know every time a player dies, it switches to someone else and shows their username. We were pretty deep into the trip when it suddenly switched to a player named Shrooms. I couldn't make that up if I tried. We had voice recording enabled, so we could save funny clips, even though the players couldn't actually hear us. We started laughing about the odds of randomly spectating someone literally named Shrooms. Then something strange happened. The player walked into a corner and slowly nodded their screen up and down. We started joking that they were somehow agreeing with us. Then they kept wandering around this tiny room in ways that felt almost like they were reacting to everything we were saying. Obviously they couldn't hear us. We were absolutely losing it. I actually clipped the entire thing, but later deleted the video because it became tied to everything that happened afterward. That moment happened only minutes before my life completely changed. Eventually the match ended, and G decided he wanted to play instead of spectate. He put on his headset and sat on the edge of the couch, trying to focus on the game. I want to make something very clear. We had used mushrooms from this exact batch before. The marijuana I smoked was the same I'd always used. We hadn't taken a larger amount than usual. If anything, we'd taken less than previous times. The next few minutes changed everything. G was focused on his game while I stepped out onto my balcony to smoke. The balcony door stayed open, so I could still see him from where I was sitting. I'd already smoked earlier that night, and it had never affected me in any unusual way before. I finished, sat down against the back of the couch, and something changed, instantly. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I suddenly couldn't control my own thoughts. My mind just kept repeating, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," over and over. I couldn't think. I couldn't focus. Then a wave of fear hit me unlike anything I've ever experienced. I've always believed genuine terror is one of the worst feelings a person can experience. This was beyond even that. It's honestly impossible to put into words. I jumped up and started shaking G. At first, he laughed and tried brushing me off. "Hang on, I'm trying to focus." I grabbed his shoulder harder. The second he turned around, his expression changed. Years later, he still tells me he's never seen anyone look the way I did in that moment. Keep in mind, he was still heavily under the effects himself. I honestly don't remember exactly what happened next, neither does he. I just remember the panic becoming so overwhelming that my body completely gave up. I leaned over the couch and got sick. I couldn't control my body. I couldn't control my thoughts. I couldn't control anything. I've never felt so helpless. We usually mix the mushrooms with freeze-dried berries because it completely covered the taste, which, if you've ever tried them, isn't exactly pleasant. Because of that, everything that came back up was bright red from the berries. G looked down and completely panicked. My roommate heard the commotion and came out asking what had happened. I don't remember much of that conversation. I only remember G repeatedly telling her, "Please stay with her, please don't leave her alone." Meanwhile, I could barely understand what was happening around me. I remember asking him not to leave, but he hurried into the bathroom. I didn't understand why until much later. My roommate stayed beside me, reminding me over and over that whatever I was experiencing would eventually pass, that I was safe, and that I just needed to get through it. It actually helped. Was I still terrified? Absolutely. But the first overwhelming wave had settled enough that I could at least lie there and wait. Eventually, I slipped into complete dissociation. Then, G came back out. The look on his face terrified me even more. I'd never seen fear like that in another person before. Seeing him panic sent me right back into that overwhelming feeling. After that, everything becomes blurry. We lay there together holding hands in complete silence. I experienced some of the most vivid mental imagery I ever had, but I genuinely don't know how to describe it. Even trying to think about it now makes my head hurt. Looking back, I realize I had experienced an extremely severe form of ego death. Some people intentionally seek that experience for spiritual reasons. I wasn't one of them. I had no idea what was happening. That's what made it so terrifying. Somehow, we eventually fell asleep. Like I mentioned, waking up the next morning and feeling like a normal person again was one of the biggest reliefs I'd ever experienced. I didn't really know how to process what had happened. G and I spent most of that day lying in bed, resting and trying to recover from the night before. Honestly, it almost felt like a dream. Something so unbelievable that my brain couldn't fully process it. But aside from that, I felt like myself again. I knew I'd never forget what I experienced, but part of me even tried to look at it positively. Ego death can completely change the way you see yourself and the world around you. Even though it had terrified me, I wondered if maybe I'd eventually learn something from it. That feeling lasted maybe a few hours. At some point, I fell asleep while we were watching something. I don't remember exactly when, I just remember waking up. I looked over at my phone, 8:15 p.m. Something was still playing quietly on my laptop. G was lying beside me, scrolling on his phone. I opened my eyes, and the second I became fully awake, it came back. The exact same feeling, the same loss of control, the same overwhelming terror, the same feeling that my own mind no longer belonged to me. Only 24 hours had passed. I was completely sober. I hadn't smoked. I hadn't taken anything. I hadn't done anything at all. And yet, it was back. Except this time, it didn't go away. Imagine having the worst experience of your life. You finally make it through the night. You wake up relieved because it's over. You tell yourself you'll never have to feel that way again. Now imagine waking up and realizing that nightmare somehow followed you into reality. Like you'd become trapped inside your own mind. That's what it felt like. I immediately turned to G. I'm starting to panic. Something's wrong. I don't know what's happening to me. He stayed with me the entire time. He kept reassuring me that everything was okay, that maybe it was just lingering anxiety from the night before. He did everything he could to calm me down. Looking back, neither of us had any idea what was about to happen. The exact timeline after that is honestly blurry, but I remember the feeling. I remember realizing that something inside me had changed. It never left. Eventually, I couldn't go outside. I couldn't look at my phone. I could barely eat. Simple everyday tasks became impossible. It felt like my brain was slowly falling apart. Throughout the day, I had had these episodes where it felt like my entire sense of self disappeared. Pure panic, pure terror, several times a day. Sometimes I'd become completely frozen. I couldn't think, I couldn't move, I couldn't function. Even small things could trigger another episode. I stopped going to school. I was in the middle of a semester. My entire life went on pause. I stopped driving. I stopped leaving the apartment. I couldn't. I simply couldn't. Looking back now, G is the reason I survived that period. No matter what happened, he stayed. He kept me distracted whenever he could. He refused to leave me alone because he knew how badly I was struggling. We've been together now for over 3 years. The unbelievable part is, this all happened near the beginning of our relationship. Most people would have walked away. He didn't. I'll never be able to fully explain how grateful I am for everything he did. I honestly owe him my life. I didn't tell my parents what was happening. Somehow, I managed to keep acting normal whenever we talked, even though I spoke with them almost every day. My roommate knew something was wrong. Some of her friends noticed it too. But I kept convincing myself I was getting better, that if I just waited a little longer, everything would go back to normal. It never did. Days passed, then weeks, nothing changed. If anything, everything got worse. The episodes became part of my daily life. Every morning, I woke up wondering if today would finally be different. Every morning, it wasn't. Looking back now, I realize I was slowly disappearing. The person I'd always been was fading, replaced by someone who lived in constant fear. I couldn't go outside. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even scroll through my phone because I was terrified something might trigger another episode. Eating became difficult. Sleep became almost impossible. Every night, I had incredibly vivid nightmares. Every morning, I woke up already panicking. There was no escape, not even in my dreams. The strangest part was how unpredictable it all felt. I'd be sitting completely still, and suddenly, it would happen. My thoughts would disappear. My chest would tighten. It felt like I was watching my own life from somewhere outside my body. Every episode felt just as terrifying as the one before. I never got used to it. I never learned how to prepare for it. The only thing I learned was how to wait for it to end. During this time, G became my entire support system. He stayed with me every chance he got. He distracted me whenever he could. He reminded me over and over that I wasn't alone. I honestly don't know how he managed it. Looking back, I can't imagine how exhausting it must have been for him. He never complained. He never acted like I was a burden. He just stayed. I still hadn't told my parents what was really happening. Somehow, I kept pretending everything was normal during our phone calls. Looking back now, I honestly don't know how I pulled that off. My roommate knew something was seriously wrong. Some of her friends noticed it too. I kept telling everyone, including myself, that I was getting better, that I just needed more time. Deep down, I think I knew that wasn't true. One thing I haven't mentioned yet was how difficult it became to eat. It wasn't that I was hungry. It was that every ounce of energy I had went toward trying to stay calm. Even something as simple as eating felt overwhelming. I lost around 15 pounds. I've always been a small person, so losing that much weight happened incredibly fast. Looking back at pictures from that time, I barely recognize myself. I want to make something very clear. Nothing I've said has been exaggerated. If anything, I've left out details because it's impossible to explain exactly what that experience felt like. For weeks, I convinced myself that I could fix it on my own, that eventually my brain would simply reset. It never happened. Eventually, something had to change. Around that time, my mom and stepdad had just moved into a new house. Since my stepbrother and I had both moved out, they no longer needed their old place. G and I both knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had become afraid of my own apartment because every room reminded me of where this nightmare had started. It felt like my brain had connected that place with panic. Just being there made everything worse. So I finally called my mom. I told her something had happened, that we needed to talk in person. G drove me over to see her. Honestly, I had no idea how to explain any of it. I was terrified she'd think I'd completely lost my mind. Looking back, I'm incredibly grateful he came with me. I don't think I could have done it alone. When we got there, I completely broke down. I told my mom that something had happened after using mushrooms. She already knew that I experimented occasionally, so that wasn't surprising to her. She listened carefully and tried reassuring me. She told me anxiety can sometimes linger after difficult experiences. But I remember telling her no, this is different. Something is seriously wrong. At the time, she couldn't fully understand what I meant. Honestly, I don't think anyone could have. I started crying. Partway through trying to explain everything, another episode hit. I had to stop talking. I asked for a few minutes alone with G because I couldn't even think clearly anymore. He stayed with me until I calmed down enough to continue. Later that night, I went home with my mom. The hope was that a different environment might finally help me start getting better. Staying with my mom was supposed to be temporary. We all thought a change of scenery might help. Instead, she finally saw how bad things had become. Every day, she did everything she could to help me. She and my stepdad wanted nothing more than to see me get better. The problem was, nothing seemed to help. Every morning, I'd wake up already panicking. Every night, I'd have incredibly vivid nightmares. Sleep became something I dreaded instead of looked forward to. Sometimes, I'd wake up in such a state of panic that I'd quietly climb into my mom's bed just so I wouldn't be alone. I know it affected her sleep too, but she never complained. She just stayed with me. Eventually, she started witnessing the episodes herself. She'd ask what I need. Every single time, I'd answer the same way. I just have to wait for it to pass. She looked completely helpless. Honestly, we all were. Looking back now, there are a lot of things we wish we'd done differently. But at the time, everyone was simply trying to help however they could. My world kept getting smaller. The bathroom fan was too loud, so I'd use the bathroom in the dark. I couldn't look at sharp objects because my intrusive thoughts became overwhelming. I couldn't drive. I couldn't spend more than a few minutes outside because all the sounds became too much. Looking in a mirror frightened me. Even showering alone became difficult. Sometimes I'd ask my mom to stay nearby because I was afraid another episode would hit while I was in there. The TV had to stay turned down. Loud noises overwhelmed me almost instantly. Ironically, I couldn't sleep in complete silence anymore. I needed background noise just to keep my thoughts from taking over. Even today, I still usually fall asleep with something playing. Looking back, I really was just a shell of myself. The only things that still brought me any comfort were drawing and music. Those became my escape whenever I could manage them. G came over often. My parents absolutely loved him, and by then they could see how much he was helping me through the worst moments. Eventually, we called my dad and stepmom to explain what had been happening. They were just as concerned as everyone else. The hardest part was that none of us really knew how to describe what I was experiencing. There aren't words for it. Around this time, something happened that still surprises me. I've never been an angry person. I avoid arguments when I can. I've never been someone who raises my voice at the people I love. Somehow, I completely broke down. I yelled at my mom. It shocked both of us. The second it happened, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't recognize myself anymore. G heard everything from upstairs. Later, he admitted it genuinely scared him. Not because he thought I'd hurt anyone, but because he'd never seen me act anything like that before. Looking back now, that moment convinced everyone, including me, that this wasn't simply anxiety anymore. Something much bigger was happening. I stayed there far longer than we'd originally planned. We kept waiting for things to improve, and they never did. Then, one morning, everything reached a breaking point. G had to spend the night. That wasn't unusual anymore. We all knew I handled things better when he was nearby. I woke up, and instantly something felt different, worse than usual. Before I was even fully awake, I started repeating the same words over and over. I need to leave. I need to leave. I need to leave. It woke G up immediately. I went straight to my mom. I told her to call my dad, call my stepmom, tell them I couldn't stay there anymore. Looking back, I realized what was happening. My brain had started connecting places with panic. Once I'd experienced enough episodes somewhere, simply being there made another one feel inevitable. I felt trapped, like I couldn't breathe. G helped me pack. My mom drove me towards my dad's place. It wasn't far from my apartment, maybe half an hour from where my mom lived. During the drive, I realized I couldn't keep pretending I was okay anymore. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just knew I couldn't keep living like this. By the time we arrived at my dad and stepmom's neighborhood, I was completely overwhelmed. My stepmom met us outside. She talked with my mom for quite a while I sat on the grass nearby. I remember calling G. I kept telling him, I can't do this. I just need to be somewhere that feels safe. I don't want to go anywhere else. He mostly listened. Looking back, I think he probably agreed with everyone else that I needed help. He just knew that saying it out loud wasn't what I needed to hear in that moment. After several minutes, my mom and stepmom walked back over. They looked at me and gently said, "We're taking you to the emergency room." My heart sank. Everything inside me wanted to refuse. Hospitals already made me anxious, and I couldn't imagine handling one while feeling like this. But I also knew I had run out of options. We drove to the hospital. I spent the entire drive trying to calm myself down. I remember staring out the window, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. When we arrived, I honestly believed they'd check me over, maybe ask a few questions and send me home. I couldn't have been more wrong. I don't remember much about walking inside. Everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life. Eventually, they asked me to change into hospital scrubs. I remember thinking, why am I changing clothes? Because the emergency department was crowded, they placed me on one of the hallway beds. My mom and stepmom took turns sitting with me. They brought me soup. My mom even brought the little rubber duck I'd been carrying around because she knew it comforted me. Looking back, that tiny gesture meant more than she'll probably ever realize. 2 doctors eventually came over and started asking questions. I answered as calmly as I could. More than anything, I wanted them to think I was okay. They drew blood and continued evaluating me. Then, it happened again. The worst episode I'd experienced since all of this began. I was sitting there looking down at the floor. At first, everything seemed normal. Then, the floor started moving. My heart started racing. I looked around the room, the walls, the bed. Everything seemed to shift. My hands didn't even look like my own anymore. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. It felt like every instinct inside me was screaming to escape, even though there was nowhere to go. My stepmom noticed something was wrong immediately. She quietly recorded a short video because she wanted me to eventually understand what everyone else had been seeing during those moments. I still have that video. Even now, it's incredibly difficult to watch. Hours passed. Eventually, the doctors returned. My mom was sitting beside me. One of them spoke gently. He explained that they thought it would be helpful for me to speak with a psychiatrist. He asked if I'd be willing to meet with someone. Honestly, I felt relieved. I immediately agreed. They told me my mom could come with me. They placed me in a wheelchair and brought us upstairs. We stopped outside what looked like a normal office area. As my mom started following behind us, one of the staff members smiled politely. "You'll be able to see her shortly." The doors open. They wheeled me inside. That's when I realized this wasn't simply another part of the hospital. I had just entered the psychiatric unit. They brought me to a room and explained the admission process. They asked me to change, checked that I didn't have anything unsafe with me, and collected my personal belongings for storage. They handed me a small packet explaining the unit's rules and left me alone for a few minutes. The room was almost completely empty. The cabinets were locked. The window barely showed anything outside. The only thing in the room was a tiny pencil that was barely bigger than my finger. Even the soap surprised me. It was one of those all-in-one products that somehow claimed to do everything. I remember actually laughing to myself for a second because after everything that had happened, that was somehow the detail my brain chose to focus on. A nurse eventually came in and started asking questions. I kept trying to explain that I thought there had been some kind of misunderstanding. She listened politely. But it was obvious she'd heard similar things many times before. She explained the daily routine, the TV channels available, meal times, and what to expect over the next few days. Then she left, and for the first time, I was completely alone. No family, no G, no phone, no distractions, just me and my own thoughts. Looking back now, that was the moment I truly believed I'd reached rock bottom. I don't want to spend too much time describing every single day I was in there, but I do think it's important to explain what the experience was like. Looking back, I understand why places like this exist. At the time, though, I was scared. Really scared. The first night felt endless. I couldn't contact the people I wanted to. I didn't know how long I'd be there. Everything felt unfamiliar. Every sound made me more anxious. I barely slept. Sometime during the night, I walked out to the nurse's station because I couldn't calm my mind enough to rest. I told one of the nurses I hadn't been able to sleep. She asked if I'd like something that might help. She mentioned a medication that was commonly used for sleep in situations like mine. I'd heard of it before and remembered trying a much smaller dose years earlier, so I agreed. After taking it, I found out the dose was significantly higher than I expected. The moment she told me, my heart dropped. I went back to my room. Within a short time, I felt completely disconnected. I couldn't organize my thoughts. Even something as simple as counting in my head became incredibly difficult. I'd never felt so mentally helpless before. Somehow, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to several staff members standing around my bed. Every morning, they checked in with the patients to ask how they were doing and discuss treatment plans. I answered their questions the best I could. I kept insisting that I didn't think I belonged there. They listened, but they weren't convinced yet. The first full day passed slowly. We had meals together. We were allowed outside for a little while. Visiting hours finally arrived. I'd asked my mom to bring G with her if possible. They both came. Seeing familiar faces was one of the biggest reliefs I'd felt in weeks. They brought me comfy clothes so I wouldn't have to stay in hospital scrubs. I expected that visit to make me feel better. Instead, it became one of the most stressful conversations I'd had during my stay. My mom looked upset, really upset. I couldn't understand why. She explained that my former roommate had contacted my family and shared information that painted a very different picture about what had been happening. She'd sent photos and messages that made it look like I'd been hiding serious problems from everyone. My family had no way of knowing what was true. They were scared. They were trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. I tried explaining everything as calmly as I could. I told them those conclusions weren't accurate, that there was important context missing. My mom listened. She said we'd sort everything out later. But after they left, I felt even more alone than before. I felt like I'd lost control of my own mind. Now I worried that the people I loved had lost trust in me too. Thankfully, that misunderstanding didn't last forever. Over the next couple days, things slowly became clearer. I won't go into every detail of daily life there, but some patients were dealing with incredibly difficult situations of their own. There were group sessions, structured activities, quiet hours, long stretches of waiting. But one unexpected thing ended up changing everything for me. There was a small bookshelf in the common area. Most of the books focused on recovery stories and personal experiences. While looking through them, I found one small self-help book tucked away on the shelf. For whatever reason, I picked it up. Looking back now, I honestly think that book helped save me. I spent every free moment reading it. I highlighted ideas that stood out to me. I copied down quotes. Some of the pages felt like they had been written specifically for what I was going through. It wasn't one of those books filled with generic motivational phrases. It genuinely made me feel understood. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled hope. One morning, around 6 o'clock, someone gently woke me up. They told me I'd been approved for discharge, and I honestly couldn't believe it. I was relieved, but mostly I was surprised. The staff explained that they'd been speaking with my parents, who had already arranged an outpatient treatment program for me after I left. They felt confident I had the support I needed outside the hospital. That morning felt surreal. Before leaving, I walked back to the common area to return the self-help book that had helped me through some of the hardest days of my life. The administrator I'd spoken with before happened to be there by himself. I thanked him for everything and mentioned how much that little book had meant to me. He seemed genuinely interested. He asked if I'd be willing to write down what I'd taken away from it and how it had helped me. I said yes. He handed me a pen and a sheet of paper. I went back to my room and spent the next 20 minutes writing. I wrote about what I'd been through. I wrote about hope. I wrote about how, for the first time in weeks, I felt like healing might actually be possible. When I finished, I asked if I could read it out loud. He smiled and sat down. So I did. By the time I finished, he had tears in his eyes. Then he told me something I'll never forget. For years, he'd been trying to convince the organization to create a real library for patients. He believed books could become an important part of recovery, but he had never been able to show leadership first-hand evidence from a patient's perspective. He told me my letter might finally help make that happen. He asked if he could make copies of what I'd written and share it with leadership. Of course, I said yes. I kept the original. Last I heard, they were moving forward with building that library. Even now, thinking about that conversation makes me emotional. Later that day, my dad picked me up. For the first time in over a month, I made it through the drive without having a panic episode. It felt like something inside me had finally started letting go. We stopped by my apartment so I could grab some clothes. Everything still felt strange. Walking back into that place brought back a lot of memories. Afterwards, my parents and I went out to dinner together. It was such an ordinary thing, but after everything that had happened, it felt extraordinary. That morning, I'd been sitting inside a psychiatric unit. A few hours later, I was having dinner with my parents. It was almost impossible to process. I ended up living with my mom for a while after that. My family found an outpatient treatment program that I attended every weekday. Looking back now, that program changed my life. It gave me structure. It gave me support. It reminded me that recovery was actually possible. I still had difficult days. I still experienced panic. Healing wasn't immediate, but compared to where I'd been, it felt like I'd finally started moving in the right direction. Eventually, my stepdad told me something I'll never forget. He said it finally looked like the person he knew had come back. Like the darkness that had been hanging over me had finally started lifting. Hearing that meant everything. Over time, my family also learned the full story about everything that had happened. The misunderstandings were cleared up. Trust slowly returned. Eventually, I moved back into my apartment for another year with a different roommate. Thankfully, that experience was much more peaceful. Today, I live with G in a completely different apartment. We're close to family. Life is stable, life is good. I stopped smoking years ago. I stay away from psychedelics completely. I'm careful about what I put into my body. Most importantly, I'm happy. I'm grateful. My brain definitely changed after everything that happened. There are still small reminders from time to time, but I found myself again. There was a long period where I genuinely believed I'd never feel normal again. I was convinced I'd lost the person I used to be forever. Thankfully, I was wrong. If there's one reason I wanted to tell this story, it's this. Please be careful. Psychedelics affect everyone differently. Some people have positive experiences, others don't. You never know how one decision might affect your life. I don't share this story to judge anyone, I share it because I lived through it. If hearing my experience helps even one person make a safer decision, then telling it was worth it. Thank you for listening. I truly wish all of you nothing but the best. Stay safe, and don't forget to tell the people you love that you love them. Well guys, that was an absolutely insane story. Reading stuff like this is a reminder that not all horror comes from ghosts and monsters. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened. I'm really glad the author found their way back to themselves, and I hope sharing this experience helps someone else. So if you or someone you know is going through something similar to this, please go get help. Getting help can only help. It's not going to make it any worse. Huge shout out to the author for sharing this story with me. It is much appreciated. And if you guys like this video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, as it does help me out greatly. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.